Hello, everybody. Kay's not here, so I feel a little bit awkward because I always have her do the introduction. But this is Thriving LDS Singles, and we're going to talk about attachment today. And I have Mary here with me. Mary is a good friend and is actually a realtor, and she is a single adult. She's over the region. So she's over the region that I work within. And you should all know Dakota. We have already had an interview with Dakota. We did his bio, so we're not going to go through his bio again. But Dakota is a therapist, a family therapist. And we'll probably will have him on lots to talk about all things relationships because he's a marriage and family therapist. So anything else you want to add to that, Dakota?
No.
Okay. And so today I've been hounding Dakota about doing this interview because I've started to get a lot of different comments and feedback about attachment, and Dakota works with attachment and attachment. What do you call it? Do you call it attachment theory or system?
Yep, it's a theory.
A theory?
Yep.
And so we wanted to talk a lot more about it. It comes up even sometimes now in dating profiles. I've seen they used to say, what's your love language? And that would be the thing. But now they are saying, what's your attachment style? Like that's relevant as far as dating somebody. So I thought it was time to have Dakota on. And Mary dates, but she wasn't very familiar with the whole attachment theory concept.
I've heard it a little bit, but I didn't really understand it. You asked me love languages, I know love languages. This is new, so this is good.
Yeah. So we'll have lots of questions.
There's more research behind attachment theory than there is love languages anyway. So
yeah.
Just gonna put that out there.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of love languages, but that's a whole other episode.
Yeah. We went through one research article in my program that talked about that really love languages just come down to quality time for everybody, and that is the primary love language. It's not.
Yeah.
It's like everybody enjoys all of them, but ultimately it comes down to quality time, which does tie into attachment because attachment is all about actual connection, and that's what you get out of quality time is true emotional connection.
I like that. And it probably says something about my attachment style because my thing about love languages is that it's information for people to manipulate me by. Like if they know I'm a it sounds terrible, but if they know that my favorite love language is ... then
if it was gifts, they would give you gifts.
Yeah. And then like maybe they didn't want to give me a gift, but they're trying to win me over. And so
luckily for you, most people, if they're like trying to use love languages, they typically actually use the love language that they like to receive the most because their brain says, oh, I feel loved when I receive a gift, so I'm going to give a gift.
That makes sense.
When they need to actually talk to their partner and figure out how their partner wants to be loved and supported.
I love that idea because it could be different from one day to the next too. Like some days my love language might be touch and another it might be quality time or who knows. So
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk attachment.
Okay. You want to start with what it is, where it came from?
Yes.
Okay. So it has been around for quite a while. The first researchers are John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and the two like most famous studies that tie to attachment are with wire monkeys. So if you've heard about the wire monkeys, they had a wire monkey that had soft blankets and cloth wrapped around it, and they had another one that had food. They studied to see which monkey the babies would attach to. And they found that they spent all of their time with the soft monkey because it had more of a nurturing feel. And then they would leave, go get food, and then come back and spend all of their time with this softer, more comforting monkey. The other one that's really famous is the strange situation, which is when the mom would leave and they would determine, the baby's reaction with the mom leaving and with the mom coming back. And there's a lot more to the
Did they
studies.
put the baby in uncomfortable situations to see how they would react to something? Isn't that what it was?
Yeah. Yeah. So that is part of it. I mean, there's so many different like things that they looked at with the strange situation. Like just even the mom leaving, like does the baby panic or not? Is the baby fine? How does the baby self-soothe? Different things like that. And so everything with attachment came out of studying very early infant relationships. And so some of the scholars actually argue against using attachment for adults even at all.
Hmm.
But it is a very, very common, like, that's if you get attachment purists that say, no, this is the only thing that they studied for attachment. And they've used it for so many different things now and so many different research things. One of my professors does a lot of attachment research. So, and then eventually it got to the point where they started to identify like what's called our internal working models. So, do you have a positive view of yourself and others, or do you have a negative view of yourself and others? And that really, to me, when I'm doing therapy, that's what I'm looking at is, do you turn toward your partner? Do you turn against them? Um,
And
we
just to
look a lot at
clarify,
pursue, withdraw cycles, things like that in therapy. And so that's really, really relevant and ties a lot into attachment.
and just to clarify what you mean by positive, positive would mean it's more about trust, like you have
Yeah.
confidence in other people to come through for you, or
Yeah.
and
I,
negative is you don't trust people to be available or
Attachment has a lot more to do with trust. Personally, I would say this, that attachment has a lot more to do with trust than it necessarily has to do with love. Love is a component, and they'll talk about love around attachment, but it really is about trust and being able to count on and having reliability in whatever the relationship is. And so, with those positive and negative views of self and others, is where you get the four different attachment styles. So, if you have a positive view of yourself and a positive view of others, then you have a secure attachment. Meaning, if you have something come up and you're having a hard time and you have needs, sometimes you're able to turn toward your partner and say, hey, this is what's going on. I need help. And in a pretty balanced way, other times you're able to be like, you know what, I'm also competent. I can do this myself as well. A more avoidant tendency. And there is a difference between just avoidant behavior and avoiding different things and different people. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is avoidant attachment. They're very, very different. Now, somebody with avoidant attachment may avoid things more, maybe, and have those behaviors a little bit more, but just because there's avoidant behavior does not mean that that person has avoidant attachment in that relationship, because it can vary from relationship to relationship. So avoidant is when you have a high view of yourself and not a very positive view of others. So you're more likely to avoid others and say, I can do this. I'm going to go solve this problem. I don't need other people around me. And so they won't engage in a relationship because they can do things themselves. They always have and they always will.
So just to clarify or to illustrate that, and I don't know if this is accurate, so this is why I'm asking the question. So you said that if you had to guess, because I haven't taken your quiz or anything, that I probably lean towards an avoidant attachment style. But I do know that one thing that terrifies me is if I have to depend on somebody else, like in a relationship, if I have to count on somebody, that's really scary for me. So is that
I have to agree.
is
I would
that
say
an
the same thing.
avoidant kind of tendency, or is there so much more to that
Yeah, because if you're more anxious, you don't have any positive view of yourself. Not any, you have some. It's a scale, it's not all or nothing by any means.
Mhm.
I mean, not really anything in the world is all or nothing.
True.
Um,
But if you're anxious, then you're going to say, "Oh, I
yeah,
need
if you're
somebody."
anxious, you need somebody.
So you're saying you don't have as positive feeling about yourself when you're anxious?
Right. Yep.
You're less positive
So
about yourself.
I can't do anything on my own.
Okay, you can't do it all. Okay.
And
Not
so
that.
I always have to have somebody there to meet my needs.
Sure. I'm
So
definitely not good at that.
that's like a lot more in like a very codependent relationship, right? Is people who are like, I have to have somebody else to do this.
Right.
And then there's somebody who has to have the desire to be relied on as well, is also part of a codependent relationship.
Right.
Not all the time. That's not how every codependent relationship is, but pretty common.
So you shared a graph with me that kind of illustrates this that we can put up at when it makes
Yeah.
sense to, or if you, but because it's kind of on a, is it on a spectrum or like
Yeah.
quadrants basically, right?
Yep. There's quadrants and bidirectional arrows that point and you mentioned the quiz, the attachment project quiz. It's just a really cool quiz and it goes through, it asks you questions about your mother, your father, overall, and your current partner if you have one. It might even cover past. All of the questions that it prefaces, it tells you. So pay attention to it. But for the most part, it's like when you were growing up, did you experience this? So it wants you to answer it that way, not necessarily like right now your experience with your parents or things like that, because attachment does change and you do have corrective experiences that, maybe your dad was really crappy to you when you were younger, and then you got a little bit older and now he's become your best friend and you go to him to talk to him about everything. Like you probably would have maybe avoided that attachment a little bit earlier and you wouldn't have wanted to turn to that figure because you were going to get punished or whatever it was. But now you have that positive view of yourself, but also you have a positive view of him and you're able to have a more secure attachment with him. So it is fluid.
So that's an important distinction because it's fluid based on the person you're interacting with and fluid based on your emotional growth or how would you say that? Because you can come across as more securely attached in general in relationships if you've done some work.
Yeah.
Right? Is that right?
Yeah. And
Now,
the quiz goes through and asks you all of those things.
okay. And then the other thing, and I'll put the link in there so that people can take the quiz.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, what if they had a secure attachment, they had a great childhood, and then they ended up for whatever reason in an abusive or a crazy relationship or a relationship where they were betrayed significantly or whatever? Does
Some
that,
sort of trauma,
yeah,
an attachment wound.
uh-huh. So does then that impact or change potentially, or could it change their stuff?
It can. I mean, it doesn't have to, but it definitely can and is a very common thing. I mean, I would say in my therapy rooms, the reason I'm seeing them is because it did.
Right.
So it's hard for me to say that. But I do believe that people are very resilient. And so I'm sure there are people who go through those things and are still able to have positive relationships and figure things out.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then, so the other question, I guess, is if you, because I think I Googled, this is dangerous. I Googled this question about, well, what are people that are single, that have been divorced or never married and are 40 plus, is there a correlation between them having some kind of insecure attachment or not being securely attached? And of course, Google said that there was. And they said it was actually more prevalent if the child had grown up in a divorced family and then had a divorce, that there was a strong correlation that they would have an anxious or an avoidant attachment. Do you think that's the case, or do you think that's just Google?
I mean, there's probably some truth in it. There's always some truth in pretty much everything in this world.
Right, right.
But I don't know that I could definitively say that that is like the truth.
Yeah, so it's not that kind of
I would say that more often than not, most people, and Google says 50 to 60. I've read a research article that says 80% of people have overall and generally secure attachment. And so there's so many people that are worked up and concerned with attachment when in reality, most people are pretty secure and do have a positive view of themselves and know that they're competent and know that they can reach out to other people too.
So that's an important thing to reiterate or to stress, is that that just because we've been through some hard things as single adults, it doesn't mean that we more than likely have an insecure or a, is that what you call it? An insecure attachment style or a...
Yeah. I mean, any of the other three, the last one that we didn't talk about is fearful. There's a lot of different words for the last one. There's fearful, there's disorganized, there's all sorts of words. Those are probably the two most common that you really hear.
Do they sometimes just call it anxious avoidant category?
Yeah, sometimes there's tons of different names for that. Something that's really common is in people who are adopted. A lot of times they tend to be a little bit more fearfully attached because, or like in foster care, they attached to somebody and then they went to a new home and they had to try again, and then all of a sudden they can't trust that person, and so they have a really hard time developing that part of that brain to help them attach, and so it's really, really hard for them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and I wonder too, in the single world, could that apply as well when there's been people that have had relationships, maybe in multiple ones, where there's been infidelity and that sort of thing, where you trust somebody and then you find out they cheated, then you get with somebody else and you find out the same thing. And do you find that would be the same behaviors as even foster? And then it becomes that lack of trust. You get close to somebody and they either cheat on you, leave you, whatever it may be. Do you find that it can be rather common as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely is a possibility. That the best way that I can really describe like a fearful attachment is push and pull. So I can't live with you and I can't live without you, to the most like deep sense of that phrase. So deep, like I will die if I do not have you in my life. So there you have the anxious part of the attachment. And at the same time, everything you do irritates me so badly that I can't live with you. And so you have the avoidant part as well. And so
makes sense.
It makes relationships really, really tough.
Yeah. So back to in a dating situation, if you take the test and you know that you don't have secure attachment, then I would have a tendency to be, when I go on a date with somebody, to be thinking in the back of my head, like, what is this person? Or how are they going to interact with me? Or what's their style? And that's a danger, right?
You're probably not actually going to be able to know. Honestly, at that point, it's kind of a waste of the time of the date, to just be really blunt.
Don't try to figure that out.
Because you don't have enough context or know, if it's a first date, you don't even know what they like and don't like. How are you able to determine if you are going to be able to turn toward them and if they're going to be able to turn toward you? Like, that's not what you're figuring out on a first date.
Right. Or even far into the relationship, you may not be ready to figure that kind of stuff out. So,
well, I think there's that danger of analyzing somebody else too, because if you don't really have a good knowledge about the understanding of it, and you think you do, and you start asking them what they are, and they start telling you what they are, I mean, I think it could be a mess if you're not really sure. Both of you could be looking at things the wrong way from the beginning.
Yeah. And I would imagine, like, if you are, okay, let's just say I'm avoidant in my attachment style, that's the lens that I'm assessing them through, which is already not very clouded. Yeah, it's already clouded.
It's already clouded.
So I don't know that
Because
you
you're already
could,
telling yourself that you're avoidant
yeah, yeah.
and I don't know.
So,
Yeah.
so
And that's your overall, but it could be very different with that one person. You have no idea.
yeah. So do you think though, at some point in the relationship, it's important to understand each other's styles? Like if you get
Yeah.
to the point where you say, okay, let's be exclusive, or let's just seriously date each other. At what point is that?
Yes, because ultimately it's helpful to identify who is the pursuer in the relationship and who is the withdrawer in a time of conflict. Time of conflict is really when you see attachment styles come out because most of the time people are operating pretty secure, but then you get into conflict and then all of a sudden you see attachment and people start to butt heads and it's all right, fine, I'll go fix this myself. And the person who's a little more anxious, they're going to pursue rather than withdraw and be like, wait, no, let's fix this together. I need you to help me fix this. And the person who's withdrawing, like, they just need some space to have some time to themselves to self-soothe, and then they can come back and revisit the conversation. If the person who is pursuing and tends to be a little bit more anxious knows, okay, they're going to be gone for 30 minutes and then we'll be back and we can talk about this, then they both have their needs met and they're able to figure out and soothe themselves in that time of distress.
Right. So at some point, it's healthy to have a conversation or say, hey, let's both take this test and talk about it. Or
Yeah.
is that?
I think that's a good idea, especially when you get so far into the relationship where you feel like it may go further.
Yeah.
I think that
I mean,
should take that test.
Or you end up in a conflict for some reason. It might be a good time to talk about it.
Test.
I would not suggest taking it at a point of conflict. I don't remember. Did we talk about the relationship attachment model?
Yeah, well, not here. We haven't.
No.
Okay.
I'm familiar with
We've
it.
talked about it though a little bit, just you and I.
Yeah.
Because that's like a really important and helpful guide in like when to have those kinds of conversations.
Oh, well, we should probably save that for a whole separate episode, right?
That's important.
Because
yeah, we could.
that model itself, I think, is really valuable.
Yeah. But I mean the general premise of that is you have to know somebody before.
But there's an acronym. I mean, you can find information. It's called RAM, right? Relationship Attachment Model.
Yep.
So it's pretty easy if somebody wanted to Google it. And we've actually talked about it on the podcast briefly, but not from an expert's point of view, only from a novice's point of view.
Okay. So it's know, trust, rely, commit, and then touch. And that is the order that they say a relationship should progress. So you have to know somebody before you can trust them. As your knowledge of them goes up, your trust of them can go up. As your trust of them goes up, then you can rely on them. And the more you rely on them and you're able to rely, the more you can commit to them. And then is when the physical touch becomes relevant.
Yeah.
And so
the context we've talked about it is everyone has a tendency to go to the physical first.
They do.
Which is dangerous. Like that's
before they know anybody.
Yeah, you should go through those phases of a relationship.
Yep.
So I can see where that can go awry really quick because a lot of people, visual, physical, that's the first things that come to their mind before the other steps.
Yeah. And then that clouds your judgment in terms of even being able to assess. Like I can see how those attachment styles may come into play quicker if you've started having a physical relationship. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm not sure, but it seems like that would be the case.
Well, that's what the world teaches us.
Right. That's true. Do you mean to have the physical first or soon, early?
Yep.
Quick.
Yeah, it does teach that.
It does.
That's all a relationship is for.
I know that's so true, but sad. But here on Thriving LDS Singles, we subscribe to the relationship model. Just so everybody knows, it's clear. But we should do an episode to talk about that a little bit more. But back to attachment styles. So I know that one of the things I asked you was, well, can you really assess what somebody else is? And you talked about, and this word I can't say, about the danger of even making attachment styles a pathology or a diagnosis. Like, it's not a diagnosis. Maybe speak to that a little bit, or talk to that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would never submit an attachment style to an insurance company. Like, it's not a diagnosis.
Okay.
And I actually believe that diagnosing in general, like if I didn't have to diagnose people for insurance, I probably wouldn't diagnose because it is pathologizing. Makes people feel broken, and they're not broken. They're going through a hard experience in life. And so anytime you go to somebody and you say, oh, you're this, that immediately pathologizes, and it's just not beneficial, not helpful, really.
Label.
Yeah.
Especially knowing that they're fluid. Like, why would you put that label and say,
or even claim it as your own identity is probably not beneficial or healthy. It's like,
I can say I'd be damaging to yourself as well.
I think it's important to be aware of, especially like in an overall sense. So that you can, if you're going through something, you can be like, okay, wait a second, right? If I'm having conflict with my partner, I can slow down and say, normally, when I feel this way, I want to withdraw. But because I actually know that I really love them and they really love me, I can trust them and they are trusting me. I actually can go have this conversation, and I'm okay with that. And you can actively go to choose that if you're aware of your relationships, of your attachment style. But to sit and dwell on it isn't necessarily going to be helpful.
Or to say, I am this, that's why I'm that way, and then just stay that way, when it can be fluid, and we can change when we recognize there are things that we can work on on a relationship.
So I have this question of, you're hearing all my crazy come out, but but so just you saying that, my reaction would be, I don't know if I could say, I know I trust this person, which clearly shows a concern. But the point is that I could, rather than just internalizing that, I can go to my partner and have a conversation and say, this is the story I'm telling myself, is that I can't, it's not safe to trust you in this setting, or I'm having trouble with this. Can we talk about it? Is that what you would suggest, or how would you?
No, with the therapy I do.
You don't trust me.
With the therapy
See a therapist is what he's going to tell me.
That is like a very specific part of the intervention, is helping people outline the 4 steps, which is saying out loud what you would, or what you're feeling. The second step is saying out loud what you would normally do. The third step is what the actual truth is. And then the fourth step is what you're going to go do now instead, because you have agency and choice to go do that, rather than the reactive thing that you were going to do, whether that was withdraw or whatever it is.
But you wouldn't engage your partner in those 4 steps. You would basically just kind of go through that process with.
I do it all the time with couples.
Okay.
I have couples go through it together, and I have them, a lot of times I'll actually have them stand on each side of the room, and one of them will say, like, this is what I'm feeling, and then they say, this is what I'm feeling, and they take their 4 steps until they meet in the middle of the room.
Oh, I like that.
And then they're able to actively make a choice of how they actually want to handle the situation. And the reason for it is not necessarily, it's really important that you pick a truth that you actually believe.
Yeah, I think that might be hard for me.
But no matter how small the truth is.
Yeah.
And as you build that truth, it feeds the cycle of peace that says, I'm loved, and so I'm going to turn toward my partner. And then when you turn toward your partner and you have a positive experience because they were wanting you to turn toward them, because normally you withdraw, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I am loved. And so even though at the beginning you don't really feel loved, the more that you
Confirmation
do
of
that and
nothing.
experience it, the more it feeds the peace cycle instead of the pain cycle of saying, okay, like I'm feeling angry right now, and so I'm going to withdraw.
Right. And then I think there's some really unhealthy things that start to happen. Like when you're in a conflict and you're starting to feel, at some point it seems like game playing starts. Like, oh, they texted me and they're needy and they want me to respond right away. And so I'm not going to. You know what I mean? Like there starts to be this kind of weird stuff that happens between couples. Like, is that because of different attachments, or is there could be all kinds of variables as to why somebody starts to have those kinds of reactions? Or like what would you recommend in those settings? Because
I mean, there's plenty of reasons for it, but I think generally it comes from a state of instability and insecurity.
Mhm. And then would the intervention maybe be still similar? Is like the 4-step thing is when you
Yeah.
don't respond to me, this is, and you go through those 4 steps or have that conversation.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And at some point, maybe if you're not very successful in doing that, just the two of you, it's probably a good idea to engage a therapist or somebody in the conversation, somebody objective that can help you navigate how to do that. Or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest a therapist.
I would
Just
think in the heat of the moment, if two people are arguing,
Yeah.
one of them probably is going, okay, wait, okay, the 4 steps. What do I need to do while the other one's yelling at him?
well,
What do I
and
need to do? I think
it's very common.
It's almost you need to work on yourself a little bit first, or even take the conflict after and say, okay, how could I have done that different? I didn't work through these steps, and I should have, because sometimes in the heat of the moment, you're not thinking 4 steps, you're thinking about what's happening on the other side.
Right.
But we need to think about those 4 steps.
Mhm.
It's how do we
You have to
how do
slow
we get
down.
ourselves in a place where we actually can take a breath and do this quick, because sometimes in the heat of the moment, it's hard to do that. To go, okay, I need to do my 4 steps while they're coming at you, or you're going to them.
Yeah. Life is about slowing down. If we want to change things, we have to slow down. If you want to change the way that you're walking, you don't just not pay attention to the way you walk and start walking faster. You slow down and you say, okay, my heel is touching first right now. And you become really aware of how you're walking. You have to slow down to actually do that, because if you just walk, you're going to be walking too fast to notice a lot of those things, because we walk all the time. And people get in conflict all the time. They're in their relationship all the time. But unless you slow down, you're never going to notice.
And I can see how that, and I like that, because even if you see it coming on, and maybe your partners, who knows, whatever's going on, if they're the ones coming at you, whatever it may be, if they see you, I think just stopping and breathing from it, taking it, and thinking it through for a minute and then reacting different, it would start to change the momentum of the possible conflicts, because instead of you reacting back, you're stopping and you're thinking, and then they're waiting. Because, well, aren't you going to say something? And then your reaction alone, just back thinking it through, could start to change that conflict. I can see where just that slow down.
Yeah.
So how do this isn't just a romantic partner discussion either, right? Like this is all relationships, would you say? Or
I would say it comes out in all relationships. I don't know necessarily that the research would say that, but I think like who we are as people and how we trust others regularly comes out in relationships.
Right. So if we had to summarize, because we are definitely at our time, if we had to summarize, what are the key takeaways, at least from this discussion? And I don't know, do you want to look real quick through some of the questions I sent you to see if there's anything you feel strongly about making sure we get in there?
I feel like we talked about all of them.
Okay. So to summarize, as we wind things up, would be first, just know what the different styles are. And it would be good to take a test to understand what your attachment style is. The one thing we didn't maybe mention is it important to know how a secure attached behaves? Like, is that the goal or not necessarily?
I mean, sure, but we know. It's not hard for us to think of a positive relationship that we've had with a friend or family member or whoever it was and be like, man, I loved being around that person. Whether it's the same gender, different gender, right? It could be a friend.
Right.
You're able to be like, wow, that's a really genuine person. And everything about them is awesome. That's what secure attachment looks like.
Okay. That's good to know. And then
We all know what feels good in a relationship.
And so then the question about is it important to understand what our style is, or?
If you want to work on it, then yes, you have to know.
Okay.
But I think that it's not necessarily, if you're engaged or married, then sure, maybe know your partner's attachment so that you can handle things differently, but not so that you can say, hey, you're
You need to
withdrawing
handle things
again,
That's would
differently.
be my
and
concern.
because you're withdrawing and your avoidant attachment is coming out, you need to do this differently. That's not gonna,
That's not healthy.
right, that's a waste of time. But if you identify it for yourself and you know what theirs is so that you can say, okay, I want to withdraw right now, which means that they're really wanting to chase me down and figure this out, which means it's really important to them. So I'm going to choose to sit and be here with them. It only takes one person to break the cycle.
I like that thought.
I do too. That's actually a good way to lead it.
Yeah.
It takes one person to break it, and that it's fluid.
Yeah.
We don't have to be stuck in that
Yeah.
We can.
particular one. I mean, we can make changes. We can work on ourselves.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And don't try to assess what the other people's attachment style is.
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to sit down on a date and figure out if you're going to diagnose somebody with depression? No. And if you are, then you need to figure out a new way to date because it's not really like.
We need a whole nother podcast on mental illness, Dakota, and mental health and dating.
Yes. If you have somebody who is experiencing depression, you're going to do things differently. But on a first date, who gives a flip? That's not what the first date's about.
No.
Or not. And we'll go through the relationship model too, because there probably is a point in time in that model. Maybe it's at the trust stage where maybe it is good to have a conversation, or maybe commitment stage.
I mean, they're also like spectrums as
yeah, it's kind of a spiral, right?
As you know somebody, your trust goes up. And when your knowing goes up, your trust still goes up. And then you're able to rely a little bit more on them. And then you know them even better. And so you trust them even more. You rely on them even more. And then you start to commit to them. And all of them keep going up like that. They don't all stay at the same because
it's not like phases.
Right.
It's a progression.
And the way he just described
cyclical
that
progression
helped me to feel better about myself. The way you said that, because that would explain building the trust level before the commitment to a point. Because if somebody tries going into a relationship too quick on me, because I don't know them well enough. And I think it freaks me out. But so I worry that I'm avoiding. But I think it's more getting the trust. I think before the commit, and then do the commitment.
It's right. And a lot of people would say that that's like,
but people aren't giving it the chance to build that.
But that's not true avoidant attachment. That's being able to look at it and say, okay, this is not something I'm comfortable with.
So,
setting a boundary rather than
saying somebody's avoidant or feeling like you are avoidant yourself is not probably in that instance not very good either.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Because I guess this is common, I think, or at least in my dating experience over the last year. I have gone out with people who have been like eager to make a commitment, right? Pushy.
Yes,
They're pushy.
That's where I struggle.
and that, like, we haven't even gone through any of those phases before
Mhm.
they want a commitment kind of a thing, or that they want to jump to physical.
We could just print some relationship attachment model shirts
There we go.
that everyone can wear on their
Pass
first
them out at
date.
a fireside.
Pass them out at a fireside. Great idea.
No, it really is a good conversation to have at some point. So maybe
Yeah.
we'll do that one next, Dakota. But thank you, because there is a lot of people talking about attachment right now and saying, oh, you're this style, that style, and why is that important? And so this has been really helpful to clear up some of the misconceptions and to better understand it. So thank you
Yeah.
for taking the
I mean,
time.
it's very, very, very surface. There's a lot more to attachment that we
Yeah.
could have gone into and covered, but it is, I think, a good general summary. So,
Okay. And then if you think of things, or if maybe we'll post in the Facebook group, like, what other questions do people have about the attachment or attachment styles that they want to know, then maybe we can do another episode if there's a lot of questions. So we can do that too.
okay.
Okay.
This is awesome.
All right. Thanks for joining me,
you.
Mary.
You're welcome.
Kay's out and about and couldn't be here, but I'm glad Mary was able to come. So this was good.
Thanks, Dakota.
Yep.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
See ya.